Question one.
Yeah.
How has name, image, and likeness changed the player-coach dynamic in college sports?
I think that's an interesting question. I think, some background to NIL, obviously, I haven't coached a lot in that era, but just watching it and knowing that it was coming down, I think everyone obviously should be able to use their name, image, and likeness, right? But how has that dynamic changed sports? I think incredibly. There's a few things I think that all of us, need to understand about name, image, and likeness. That's an individual thing, but the universities are using that to attract players. But the NCAA is actually the governing body of that, and that's not supposed to be a deciding factor on where you go to college. Most kids trying to decide where they go to college based on the academics. The second part they're trying to decide is the coaching fit. Do they trust the coaches? Can I develop at that university? Right? Can I win and give myself an opportunity to go on to the next level as a professional athlete and compete? And so I think you check all those boxes. Now you have to check the next box, which is name, image, and likeness. I think when you talk about the overall sports, it works for football, it works for basketball, it works for programs and sports teams that have full scholarships. I think it's a nightmare for college baseball. You have 11.7 scholarships and you're recruiting 30 players, and you have to split those scholarships up to begin with. And you know that just like yourself when you were a college athlete, right? And then you look at somebody like yourself, right? Uh, I would have had a very difficult time after your sophomore season when you hit 30 home runs and led the NCAA in slugging percentage. What would have happened if name, image, and likeness was part of that? Was USF going to give you the name, image, and likeness, or was LSU going to come and get you? And for a player like you, LSU was going to come and get you, and they were going to offer you a whole lot of money. And I would have probably had to have a real good conversation with you to be like, I think it's best for your family. And that would have been a very difficult thing, because we had such a wonderful relationship. But how is that going to change? Oh, immensely. The coaches and the player relationship, the player and the player relationship, the jealousy. That's a tough dynamic to handle.
Well, yeah, I mean, and there's the NIL layer that affects the culture, right, of it. But then there's all these tiers inside of it, like you said, the LSU versus a USF situation. And it's not like, I mean, even in football, it isn't like all of the Division I football schools have a gigantic collective either. I mean, it's pretty well pushed into the corner of the obvious players, right? Because they have the larger, more lucrative alumni base than, say, a smaller one. Could you feel when this came in to be, I have no idea what it ever was at USF. I assume that it was pretty much nothing or minimal, if anything at all. But did it did it affect the expectations of the players coming into the program?
Yeah, I think even on a smaller scale, like just go back a little bit, I saw it coming years ago when I was recruiting players, and players wanted to know, what's your glove contract? What's your bat contract? How many uniforms do you have? How do you travel? How do you feed the players? And I saw it coming kind of like in that realm, right? People wanted to know, like, what kind of batting gloves, where's all the gear coming from, and how can I see that gear? And then you take it to another level. Now you go name, image, and likeness, and now those kids are thinking, hey, how do I use this to help myself? And yeah, I saw it coming, and it was kind of alarming because I wanted student athletes to pick the university based on the academics. I wanted them to pick the university based on my ability to coach them and mentor them and help them for the next 10 to 15 years of their life. And they were more concerned with how many uniforms and what kind of cleats and what did the bling look like. And it started to be a little alarming for me. And I needed to make a little change where like that's, that's a piece of it. But now there's a whole bigger piece. It's like, how can I gain from my name, image, and likeness? And how can I propel myself? And when you look at it, boy, that's going to take a full-time person to oversee that. And the NCAA is trying to oversee it. And I don't think they have an understanding of how many layers there are in this dynamic.
Well, I read that it was one of the infractions, I think, what was it, Tennessee? So the University of Tennessee's infraction that we just got handed down. And did you read anything about that article or about that situation?
No, I did not.
Okay, so the AD or whoever the spokesperson is for the university is giving a lot of pushback because they're just saying that the rules are set up, they're not in any way possible to be real. So for instance, it is not supposed to be allowed by the collective. So the name, image, and likeness people will like they're not allowed to use that or speak to it as like a recruiting tool,
Yes.
right? And I don't know how it's not. What they're saying with how they expect it to be executed, as I'm understanding, is like, um, hey, there's Anthony Giarratano. Hey, we want you to come to school. And while there may be tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars that are with that, you aren't supposed to realize or talk about that until you're on campus. Is that really that's the order of things according to how they want it to be?
Well, that's how they want the order to be, but they can't police that order. I mean that's a beast that they're going to have to get a hold of. And I read an article about Alabama football, and kid went into the recruiting process with Coach Saban in Alabama, and he loved the school, and he thought he could be a NFL player, and he trusts the coaches, and he could play for a national championship. And he decided to go someplace else because he said they were very light in their offer of the NIL money. And so, when you read that, you're taken back because the kid says, well, they were light in their offer. Well, realistically,
Offer,
they can't
right?
offer, but and so you think about your situation as an athlete, Tag, and you had to get an agent when you became a professional athlete, and so you had a high-powered agent, right? And he took care of all the negotiations. And you think about going into college and signing a college scholarship. Who are the agents for the players that are taking care of the scholarship and the NIL money? Well, it's the parents. And that causes a whole nother dynamic because the parents are the agents to the players, or the players have somebody that's taking care of the NIL money and the NIL deals. And now that throws another layer into it where you're like, you're not just getting a college athlete to come and play for you. I mean, you're bringing on a whole nother level
A
of
brand.
agents. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And who, when you're discussing with the parents, first of all, the scholarship money, 11.7 scholarships in baseball, you're an equivalent sport. And parents think that every kid gets a full ride. And they
Yes.
don't. You have to split it up between 32 players now. That's the max. You can have 32 players on scholarship with 11.7 scholarships. So that's 30% of scholarship money. So the other 70% you're paying to go to school. And so you want to make that up in NIL money so that you can pay for your tuition and pay for all the other stuff. And so when you're looking at that, boy, that causes a huge dynamic. You think about football and basketball, those are full scholarships. So any of the NLI money up and beyond above that is money that you're making. And so I think when you see the three kids at Colorado buying their dad a house who was a multimillionaire, played in the NFL for 20 seasons, and they're buying a house in Boulder for him. There's a lot of money in the NIL business.
Yeah, particularly at certain ends of it. When did you, so you mentioned the gear part of it when that became a thing. What's the cause? When did it happen? Was there a specific year or thereabouts that you remember it happening? And then as someone who's been on both sides of it for a while, what do you think was the cause of it?
Yeah, I think the cause of it is just social media. I think when you look at social media and you look at the posts of the start of the season, if you go to the start of the season for every Division I team, they're going to have a big picture of all their gear, their locker rooms, their weight rooms, their facilities, right? There's videos out there of all the facilities in the country. And so as a athletic director or an athletic program at a Division I university, you thought about, well, the coach was a very important factor who we hired as the coach. The facilities, we have to build our facilities up in order to get kids. And then we have to have a fan base that is there. And now we have to start branding ourselves. So our uniforms, our hats, our helmets, our equipment has to start branding itself so that all the people that are wearing the Jordan brand, that's a big deal. Kids are drawn to that. Hey, I want to go to Michigan and wear the Jordan brand. I want to, that's something that they want to do. And so about 15 years ago, I saw it changing. I saw kids starting to ask. We start putting the logos on our gloves. We start putting the logos on our batting gloves. We started, changing and posting everything that kids were getting, from sweatshirts to travel gear to shoes, and then the shoes started to get blinged out. And so you just look at that, and it wasn't back in the day when you had kids, you got two pair of shoes, and if you were lucky, you got a fielding glove, and we supplied the bats and the balls. And boy, now you have to supply way more than that, and in order for kids to be comfortable.
Just 1 second, I gotta plug in. What happened to my deal here? There it is. Would that is that taken over that part of it? Did that become a more prevalent part of your recruiting pitch than like how many professional players you had as an example? Did it rise up to that level of importance? I mean, it just seems pretty drastic.
Oh yeah, I think it rose up every bit as much as how many graduates you had, how many professional athletes you had, what round those professional athletes were in, where they were. I think it rose up right next to it, and
And
I
it
think
means
that
nothing. It doesn't mean
yeah,
anything.
no, it doesn't. No, no, but it made them feel good, right? It made them feel comfortable. It made them feel like the university was supporting them, and so I think it became a race, and it still is a race. I mean, even today, and when you zoom in on college football, how many college football programs have you seen wear the same uniform for 10 straight weeks? I mean, there's a
Yeah.
different uniform every week, different helmet, different logo.
How, in the same vein, not necessarily specific to NIL, but the second question that I had was, how has name, image, and likeness changed the player-player team dynamic in your, you know, in your all of your 25, 30 plus years of coaching? How did and we'll get to culture later, but the player to player relationships, they got to be more complicated now than they were, right?
Yeah, it's so difficult because, everybody wants to keep up with whatever the star player's doing or whoever's getting the most. And there's no secrets anymore, right? You don't keep your scholarship money a secret. Everyone talks about it, and it becomes a very difficult task to keep the culture going in the right direction. Uh, I mean, I spent a lot of my time trying to figure out how to keep the kids focused on the things that I thought were important, like academics, like building relationships, like maturing, like the team was important, like representing the university. And I think, and when you look at it now, the dynamic with player to player is, how much money are you making as an athlete, and how much scholarship money are you making, and what kind of car are you driving, and what are you putting in the bank, and when will you go, what round will you go in, and how much will you sign for, and it's just that dynamic of like that comes with hard work and that comes with success. And we're kind of putting that in front now with the NIL and the player to player relationship, because now it's like, let's get what we can get. You could hit a player down in the 8 hole in a lineup before, and now if if he doesn't like where he's hitting in the lineup, he's looking to get in that transfer portal and go someplace else.
DeSanto Rollin versus Ole Miss, that lawsuit. So Kiffin was accused of maliciously, deliberately, intentionally, and in blatant disregard for the rights and health of Rollins, verbally assaulted him. The judgment was that and this was a quote from the judge, although Kiffin's conduct in the meetings was certainly offensive and imprudent, it was more akin to immature insults and indignities than to behavior going beyond all possible bounds of decency, end quote. My question is, should a player be allowed to sue a coach for immature insults?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, right? When you look at that situation, the answer to that is no. Just simple no. You shouldn't be able to sue a coach for that. I mean, for abuse, yes. Should he? But there has to be so much more context to that. First of all, this is a highly recruited athlete who moves from the offensive side of the ball to the defensive side of the ball, and he's not happy with making that switch, right? So the coach is already behind, and then there's a mental health issue, and he takes some time away for the mental health issue, and the coach contacts him for a meeting, and he disregards the meeting because he doesn't want to meet with the coach. And so then the coach contacts him again, and he disregards the meeting again with the head coach. And in the meeting, when he's uh, audio taping their conversation, the coach is like, "Hey, I'm your boss. Like I asked you to come in here for a meeting, and you disregarded that for 2 weeks. That is immature. Like in the real world, when your boss calls you, you probably have about a 15 to 20-minute window to get back to your boss. And if you disregard that message, there obviously should be a conversation between whoever is overseeing you and yourself as to why are we not communicating like normal people. And I think he's trying to teach him a lesson more than trying to insult him, like, hey, we gave you plenty of ample time, and then the kid talks about the mental health issue. You don't think these issues are real? And Coach Kiffin says, yeah, those are definitely real issues, but this is a real issue also. You have to communicate with me. And I've had those conversations with many kids sometimes, where it's like, I know you're afraid to come in and speak to the head coach when there's a problem, but that's life. We need to figure this out. We need to communicate. He was unwilling to communicate at that time. He needed more time. And so then he ended up suing for $40 million, and the judge threw it out based on he had every opportunity to go back to the team. And I just don't think that kids, and Tag, when you look at it, was it the kid that actually sued the coach, or was it the parent, or was it the advisor, or was it somebody in their camp that said, well, you should sue? Because I don't really think that a 19 to 22-year-old kid has a confrontation with their head coach and he thinks, well, I'm going to call a lawyer and sue him for embarrassing me or talking to me like that. And I just think it's
You
far
don't hang on
deeper.
it. Just to make sure I'm understanding. So you don't think that it would be in the consciousness of a 19 to 22-year-old kid to sue an adult or an authority figure?
I don't think so. I think it is now the way that the world's going and social media and everything that's being printed and everything that we're seeing is every kid that has an issue that goes into the courts, they have a voice and they're being heard. So I think, no, I don't think that never would have crossed my mind is to say, well, I think I'm going to sue my coach because he's not happy with me. I'm not, I don't know if maybe I'll push that back on you. Did it ever cross your mind that you would sue somebody based on their comments trying to make you a better person or student athlete?
Yeah, no. It never definitely would have never crossed my mind. When I read into the Ole Miss situation, what and when you read what Kiffin said, what I gather is that, and it was an aha moment for me, particularly now that I'm coaching, I didn't really realize or frame what the challenge was in that way to myself. But I saw in Kiffin, he doesn't have the ability to discipline. I think that's something that's really unique about the coaching challenge of this right now. And I'll say it from me coaching young teenagers all the way up through college, and then even speaking to, my handful of friends that are still in the professional side of athletics. It does not sound like a coach is no longer allowed to demand discipline or instill discipline into a kid. And in this Ole Miss case, the way that I feel that his shine was taken away. So he was an athlete who was getting a lot of attention. He was sounds like he was even one of the higher NIL guys at an SEC school in football, right? And he his failure or whatever his challenges were, there was no you could tell that he had no concept of his own burden of responsibility to be disciplined, to have any sort of discipline or to have any sense of accountability. Um, and I didn't really realize this when I was coaching 13 and 14-year-olds, but I couldn't discipline them. I couldn't. I suppose I could discipline them I would never do it personally. It would be to the group because I felt like there would never I could never address a personal discipline issue with a kid because I didn't know how he'd run with it. And so what I ended up doing was make it just this one person's actions or what an individual would struggle with, it would turn into a lesson or a story for the whole team so that nobody feels singled out. And while I personally would not ever think to sue a coach unless they like broke the law, I suppose. I don't even think that I would think of it that way, still, but I wouldn't. But I feel like I don't even think the modern day player coach. I don't think the modern day player even thinks of it. I think I don't want adults get involved. Then it gets to that level, but there's an entitlement factor to that. I'm above discipline. I'm above stern conversation. I feel that that's how it is.
Yeah, I think the coaches have lost their ability uh, to be who they want to be in order to help the student athlete with their best interests at heart, to help them grow up, to help them assume accountability, to help them learn from their mistakes, to help them toughen up maybe is not the right word because you start using that, like just understanding that as they mature, the real world is going to beat them up if they don't learn these lessons. and learn how to do these things. I just think the coach is put in such a difficult task now. Your job as a coach is to just try to make everybody happy and give everybody ample playing time and make sure that you uh make sure that you have a file for every single meeting and you never have a meeting by yourself where something could be misconstrued or said differently. I think you just lose the opportunity to move about as you would as a great leader, right? You have these leadership skills, you believe in these leadership skills, you want to use these leadership skills to help kids become better leaders, and you do not have that ability anymore to use that because that when they go home and have these conversations with mom and dad, the percentages of those conversations that mom and dad have when you and I would to go home and you talk to your dad, and I would go home and talk to my dad and say, Dad, I was at, first of all, I would never tell him what happened at practice if it wasn't good because I didn't want the wrath of what he would say to me, right? But if I went home and said to Dad, Dad, this is what coach said to me, Dad would say, well, you had to have done something for coach to say that to you. What do you need to change? Dad would never focus in on what coach said. He would focus in on the behavior that coach was trying to change. You know, you need to work harder. You need to listen better. You need to be, he would focus on those aspects. Nowadays, you go home and you tell mom and mom and dad are like, well, coach can't talk to you like that. That would never come out of my father's mouth, whether my coach was right or wrong. My dad would stand the line and say, okay, what is the lesson here that my son needs to learn in order to be a better leader and a better person and a better teammate and a better player? What does he need to learn so he can grow up and pay his own phone bill and pay his own insurance and own a home someday and raise kids and help the world, right? And in today's world, it's like, no, what kid has to pay their own phone bill and pay their own insurance and take care of their own bills, right? So it's like we just kind of go backwards. And you think about that with your dad, right? He coached you, and you didn't get to go home and tell mom that coach was being hard on you because he wanted you to be a better quarterback.
No, I think, and my dad's words, and he talked about recruiting a lot to me, and maybe I just remember it because I was, I was always in the margin, so to speak, and so I was always listening to what would make you stick out and what would, all things being equal, you fall on the side that you want to fall onto. And I have to remind a lot of my parents over at Slammers a lot that making relationships work is part of the challenge. It's part of what you have to navigate. It's part of what you have to overcome in order to gain the opportunities that you want, you know? Um, there doesn't seem to be an understanding of that, if, by the in the, I'll say modern day player, I'll just say the young player now, that they think, they think that whatever they put out, or what, however it ranks, the rank and file of it, they think it's very quantitative, and they don't understand that making relationships work, that sports is a business, right? Sports is a business, and you have to make relationships work in order to gain opportunities in that domain, and that just does not seem to be very well understood.
Oh, I think that's very well said. And you know, I have conversations with my own son from the time he was 13, and he would come to me and I would say, win him over. Figure out how to win him over. Win your coach over. Win that relationship over. Figure out how to come on out on top in that relationship. Don't come to me and complain about what you don't like. You find a way to make that relationship work. You find a way for that coach to play you every day. You find a way for that coach to trust you. You find a way for that person to believe you. You find that way. And I think when you look at that, that we have to be able to have some of those conversations. And I think as we get a little bit older and we're like, oh, well, geez, maybe we're losing touch with reality, but realistically, we're not trying to make everything hard. We're just trying to say, hey, build better relationships. Learn how to understand what the lessons are. Don't just condemn everybody for what they say. Well, this is what you said, and now you're abusing me as a human being. And no, we're not trying to do that. We're trying to build a relationship and some trust here. And I think you can attest to this, and so many people can. There's some difficult times in any relationship. And as soon as you make it past those difficult times, boy, you build some notches as to trust and belief and things like of that nature.
How would you describe the coach's burden of responsibility for the mental health of the player?
Yeah, I think there's always a responsibility for mental health of everybody that you're around. The burden of responsibility, I think each person has to take part of that burden, right? There's never a coach. I don't know a coach that's gone into the game that's wanted to make the mental health issue worse. I think we as coaches, we go in and we want to make lives better. We don't always know where people are coming from, but we do have a burden to make sure that they're healthy and that they're safe and that we make a difference in their life. But we don't always know where they're coming from. So we do take a burden with that. But I don't think we could carry the entire burden. There's some parenting that's gone on in there, and there's society, and there's relationships. But I don't think that we can helicopter our burden uh, and hover over the locker room and make sure everything that's said is said with kindness and love and respect. I mean, there has to be a culture of that, but we can't guarantee that every single second of every day. We have to sometimes react and fix things that are broken. So I think that's the burden that we take.
How is the helicopter parent best managed?
Ooh. That's a new phenomenon that we have, right? Where it used to be as a coach, and uh, we didn't have much communication with parents. We just had the communication with the kids, and parents didn't call about playing time or opportunities, or that wasn't part of it. But in today's day and age, that's part of it. And so you have to be really open to communicate to get everybody to understand what the goal is and how to get to that goal. And I had an open door policy with players, right? When they weren't happy with what was happening with their playing time, they could always come in the door and we could discuss it. And I probably had 4 or 5 things that they needed to do in order to get in the lineup and play. And if they met those 5 things, they were probably already in the lineup and we weren't having that conversation again. But now I need to have that conversation with them that they're going to take back to their parents, and their parents are going to have an opinion of what they need to do based on what I said they needed to do. And then so we have to really be aware of understanding that dynamic. I don't think that we as coaches or leaders or people can just alienate the helicopter, because I think if we tried to push the helicopter out, there's going to be a crash somewhere. But I don't think we could accept it and just let them run every single decision that we have. So I think a lot of times I say this: my communication needs to be solid with the player, and then the player needs to communicate with the parents. And if I need to communicate with the parents, I will. And there's been times that I've had to do that, where I've had to communicate with parents on playing time or effort or the academic side of it or the social side of it. And I had to try to square that away. And that's a very fine line, because when you're talking to somebody about somebody that they love and believe in, it's a pretty difficult task to get your points across.
Yeah. You know, what's really come out, I'd say in the 3, 4 years now that I've started coaching, and then I have to reflect on what my professional sports experience was like. I mean, it was, I knew it at the time, and it was part of the experience for me was I just knew it. But now that I have to explain it, and I am consistently in front of people that want to learn how to become elite at something, right? And that's how that's the best way to describe, I think, the coaching conversations, the in-depth coaching conversations that I have with parents, let's say, that's what they want to bring out. And what is not really well known, and what I think, particularly when you deal with teenagers, when they have aspirations, they have dreams that are around sports. What people don't know, and what is really surprising for me to reflect on, is how well successful athletes are at managing themselves.
Right.
And at the professional level, in particularly, you have all of the attributes, the physical skills and whatnot. But I can't think of a single athlete that sustained themselves as a professional that wasn't really, really good at knowing what they needed to eat, knowing when they needed to rest, knowing when they needed to train hard. All of those things just go all the way, all of the intangibles that it takes in order to be successful. All of the great ones, I mean, to be perfectly at an elite high level, they all just have it. And again, if you can't manage yourself, if you can't rest properly, then you're not going to make it very far in sports. I don't care how talented you are, you know? And I think that in the to bring that back to the helicopter parent and the management of it, is it's kind of like, hey, just so you know, you can do all that you want, but unless they can manage themselves, they're never going to be able to compete. They're never going to be able to lose, come back and win again. You can do all that you want, but that's just not going to happen, you know?
It's really interesting to watch my own children and even people like yourself, right? That have gone through it, and you see that how you manage yourself now is incredible versus maybe where you were as a young person. But you do, you know what you want to eat, you know how to exercise, you know when to sleep. You also know what to think. And I think when you think about helicopter parenting, they don't allow you to make those decisions for yourself. They're always telling you how to think and how to act and what to do and where to go. And so I think when the parents allow the kids to make decisions, those are the people that learn how to manage themselves very, very well,
Hmm.
because your parents allow you to fail. They allow you to learn. They allow you to make decisions for yourself, and you learn how to trust yourself. And then that's, that I think that goes back to the very question you were asking about the discipline of the coach. The player has to have that discipline. If the player doesn't have that discipline, it's so hard for the coach to give it to them now.
What advice do you have for someone who wants to do everything they can to give their student athlete the opportunity to reach their full potential without being labeled a helicopter parent? I
Yeah.
find this, it's almost in like 25% of them where they really are helicopter parents, but they don't want to be, right? But they
Right.
also have an obsession with providing for their child because they love, right? It's just love. That's all that it really is, but they don't know
Right.
how to really calibrate that. So what I'm really asking is, what's the line, and how is it best understood by someone who's never had any experience with college or pro sports? Like, what is that line? Hey, we understand that you're doing all that you can, but this is where you got to let go. Where did you describe that line for someone who's cognizant of that?
It's really kind of interesting because I go back to my conversations with my own son. And, he was a little kid, and he was modeling you and all the rest of the great players that played for me. And I used to always say to him, do you want to play? Oh, yes, Dad, I love to play. Do you want to play in college? Yeah, I would love to play in college. Do you want to play at the pro level? Yeah, I want to be a pro. Do you want to be successful? Oh, I want to be very successful. And I would say, okay, then I'm going to push you and hold you to that standard. Because if you really want to be great, then I have to hold you to a standard, right? And I would have that conversation with him regularly. You know, do you want to be great? Yes. Okay, then you need to stretch more. You need to lift more. You need to run more. You need to, these are the things you need to do if you want to be great. And I think you look at a helicopter parent and they have to take a step back and have those conversations with the kids. Do you want this as much as I want this for you? Because if you do, then let's seek out expertise of people like Tag that can help us get to that level. And let's sit down with people that really know how to get there instead of just me. Instead of me just saying, okay, look, this is what you got to do, this. It's like, okay, let's talk to a professional that knows what you need psychologically, emotionally, physically, everything. And then let's map out a plan. And so you take those helicopter parents and you educate them. And because I think they, you know, inside them, they're going a million miles an hour and they may know how to run very successful businesses and they may know how to do things, but they definitely might not know how to become an athlete at an elite level and
Yeah.
what that's going to take, what that balance looks like, what that conversation looks like. So I think you have to seek out professionals and you have to take that advice from them. You know, when we want to be better at golf, we got to go to somebody that knows more about golf than we do. We
Yeah.
want to, you know, when we want to be better in a relationship, we have to talk to somebody that's a relationship specialist. I think it's funny in today's world, right? You look at social media and there's all these people that want to be coaches. You know, can you coach people in the business world? And there's these big blurbs out there, right? And you're like, you look at that and they're taking a 24-year-old and that 24-year-old is coaching you on life. And you're like, well, at 24 years old, how much do you really know about life? Right. And so now they're experts. And so you really have to be careful when you put the label on an expert, right? How do
Yeah.
you,
How do you build culture?
oh, every day, every single day, every single day. If you don't take care of your culture every day, it's going to break down. So you have to have a plan in place. You have to speak about it every single day. You have to work at it every single day. You have to be patient when people fail. You have to trust and give leadership an opportunity to lead. But you build culture from inside. You never build culture from the outside. So you have to recruit the right kind of players. You have to build those relationships. You have to have those players build the relationships with everybody else. But you do it one day at a time and you continue to do it every single day.
When you're not totally sure, and I'm sure on the teams that I played on that were yours, the teams that we shared together, had to have been in your time at USF, you weren't in terms of like this ideal culture, you had to have been because it was early on in your time, you had to have a lot of question marks. How do you answer those questions? How do you create those challenges to make them kind of self-identify whether they're in or they're out, so to speak?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because your culture changes every single day and the people and the personnel change every single day. And you have to get the right people on the bus and right seats. And you don't always have that. So sometimes you have to cruise down the road without the right people in the right seats in hopes that one day you'll have all the right people in the right seats and go from there. And so it's an ever-changing model of building that culture. So when you look at, when I first went in to USF and I tried to build the culture, it wasn't all there from the beginning. I didn't have all the right people, and I didn't have all the right relationships. And so I had to build those one at a time. And as time went on, the success of people like yourself and Jesse Foppert and Patrick McGuigan and, the success of the players, the Zimmer brothers, and just the success of people started to help to build the culture, because there was more winning and there was more discipline, and those players attracted better players, and those students that graduated attracted better students. And so then as you go through that, you start to notch down, the academics are starting to take care of themselves and the kids are really wanting to come and learn. The work ethic is really starting to take a different turn, right? The success is starting to take over itself. You're starting to win those little battles where, those emotional wins that you needed. And I go back to Arizona, right? Being at Arizona, we didn't have the greatest club in the world, and we're playing at the University of Arizona, and they're really good, and they beat us the first night. We drop a pop up at first base, and they come back and beat us. And the next day, I'm just fired up and ready to go. And I remember you being around the cage, and uh, we got to day 3, and you said, "I don't think anyone wants to win more than G wants to win today," right? And so it's like being able to being able to relax and get some of those emotional victories and not have so much tension, and being able to compete at the level that we wanted to compete at day in, day out. I think once we had that, now we had a chance to be successful.
I was watching I don't know how much tennis you watch, but the Australian Open, it kicks off the season every year. And I think tennis as a sport has the best commentators. Just they do a really good job of painting a picture of the game. And you know what I found out watching that it made total sense. As soon as I heard it, I was like, oh, of course. But what they talked about is the all-time greats, the best tennis players of all time, some of the most dominant athletes in the sport and that the world has ever known of in any sport. They only win a tiny percentage above half. They lose in their career. For all intents and purposes, think of all of the shots and all of the points that they play. They, by fractions of a percent, win more than they lose. The difference is how they talk to themselves in those wins and in those losses. That the difference between becoming one of the like an all-time champion or an ultimate champion and losing just a few more points is all about how you talk to yourself in between the points and what regard you have for yourself and in that moment, and how that determines so much about what your success is. And that was interesting about in an individual sport, right? You think about that, and that's so true. And it's really challenging as an individual, I would think, and also conversely, as a leader of a group, I think that would be hard. I think those would be the two biggest challenges.
Mhm.
Being in the group, right? Being in the group, understanding culture, oh, that helps you, that lifts you up. You know what I mean? That helps guide you, that helps gives you purpose inside of little micro decisions, sort of a thing. Whereas as an individual or as a coach who's trying to organize a group and create culture, there's a lot, like you said, those emotional wins. You have to build those. You have to receive those. You have to identify those because I think otherwise you get frustrated.
I think it's very interesting in tennis, and I do watch some, not a lot, but there's only one winner every week.
Yeah, everybody else loses
There's only one winner every
in the
week.
whole
Everyone
world.
else
In the
loses.
whole world, in the whole game,
Yeah.
there's only
So
one
in the
winner.
Australia, there's only one winner. and the rest are losers. And they
Hmm.
pack their stuff up, they get on the plane, they go to the next week. And then the next week, oh, by the way, there's only one winner. So you're almost playing for a national championship every week. And when you lose in round one, how do you talk to yourself? How do you get yourself back? Right. And it's really interesting to see that. And you think about culture inside of culture, right? So when you're building culture, like, you have to build the academic culture, you have to build the work ethic culture, you have to build the social culture, you have to build how we talk to each other, how we overcome losing, how we are humble in winning, how do we, how do we take infield, outfield? How do we run on and off the field? How do we go down to first base? How do we put our helmets in the rack? Just when you oversee culture, right? You're talking about everything. How do we handle ourselves in the airport? How do we handle ourselves on the bus? What's the locker room like? And there's all these subcultures. When you're a tennis player, it's you.
Yeah, it's the culture is whatever's going on
It,
up here
it,
right
it's
now.
it's just you. Whatever goes through your mind and whatever your coach puts in your mind or whatever your trainer, but you don't have 25 teammates that help you through it. Like, hey, stay with it. No, when you go out on that court, everybody you compete against is trying to beat you. And you either win or you lose. And that's why it's such a when you watch them, such a mental grind for them to believe in themselves. Because you just think about coaching, right? Not everyone is as successful as you see out there, right? Like the Alabamas or the Clemsons, right? So Clemson wasn't as successful this year as they were in the past. And boy, there was a lot of pressure on Coach Sweeney, right? And, but when you look at it, to get into the Hall of Fame as a coach, if you win 60% of your games, you're a Hall of Famer, right? You're the best of the best. And same thing in tennis, right? So it's not like these winning percentages are at 80 or 90% and people just win, win, win. When you think about Michael Jordan, and first thing that comes to mind when you think about Michael Jordan is how many game-winning shots he's hit, how great he was. But he was the best defensive player in the NBA for 16 years. No one remembers him like that. No one remembers how much defense that man played. They only remember the shots that he's made. And so it's really interesting. Like you're only remembered if you win an Australian Open, never if you lose.
Yeah, yeah. Last question. What is when you get past all this, what's next for you? What do you want to do?
Yeah, I want to give back. I want to keep giving back. I think what's next for me is some kind of consulting business where I can help coaches at whatever level. Doesn't matter if it's tennis, soccer, it doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter if it's youth coaches, college coaches, help people understand how to build culture, how to organize, how to communicate. I really want to give back to the game that was great to me. So I want to try to help people like I did my whole life. I think that's what I always set out to do was to help people become better, parents, better husbands, better coaches, better teachers, better leaders. So I really want to give back to that realm. I'd like to publish, I'd like to write a book and publish, the trials and tribulations of what I've been through for the last 2.5 years. But I'd really like to uplift over the last 34 years of coaching and put that in the book as well, right? I'd like to have an opportunity to enjoy the people that I built relationships with. So that's kind of been a severed tie for me, is to leave the community that I once was in, and I don't have that consistency where I can see everybody flowing through. And I'm kind of out of that realm, and I want to get to a place where I can revisit with my players that have been successful and the players that have even gone through that maybe weren't as successful on the field, but they have been in life. I'd like to get to a point where I could communicate with those people more often. I'd like to get to a point where, you know, I could go back and really enjoy the fruits of all my labor. But right now, that's not the case. But eventually, I think that's what's next for me.
It's been as being your friend through this and keeping close contact with you, and then also being mentored by you my whole life, going on 25 years now. I remember when I was in the program and I would go through challenging things, and I've actually set it to trip a couple of times even this week, and then we had a chuckle about it. Um, you used to challenge us. Well, what's the lesson? So I'll ask that's my last question for you in this. You've been very resilient. I've been impressed with how true you've been to what you were as a coach and as a leader and as a mentor in my life. And you, in the most challenging of circumstances, are representing what you always taught us. And that's what I always remember you putting in front of me, was to say, okay, hey, the net effect, positive, negative, or whatever you're going through, all of that doesn't really matter. And that plays itself out over time. How we take advantage, how we move forward as individuals, is to get inside of it and be objective about, well, what's the lesson? So I ask you, for the last 2.5 years and what you've gone through, do you have any clarity or any representation of as to what the lesson is or what you've learned?
Yeah, I think I've learned a lot over the last 2.5 years about myself, how resilient, right? Or can I walk the walk that I used to talk, right? And I think I find myself every morning asking myself that, can you overcome adversity? Can you walk the walk? Can you talk the talk that you've been talking all this time, right? Because I've been hugely successful. And for the first time in my life, I've hit this wall of adversity, and how am I going to deal with it? And how am I going to come out? And I want the people that I've communicated with, that I've taught, that I've built relationships with, to understand that you could still be successful here. You could believe in yourself. You can still do the things that you want to do in your life, no matter what adversity. And I want to be that person, right? I want to be that person that makes it out, and everyone can be like, "Wow, that how did you do that?" Well, I did it the same way that I coached the team, the same way that I built relationships. And so there are difficult days where you don't have that team to coach right now, but really you're coaching yourself. Like, so I'm having those conversations with myself a lot. I really appreciate the support that I've gotten from the players that have played for me, like yourself, Ryan Sidauer, Brian Zahn. The list goes on. Nick Serbo, the people that reach out to me weekly. How are you doing? And I think eventually one of these days, I don't want anyone to call and ask how I'm doing. I think I want to enjoy, how are your kids? How is your life? What's happening with your job? And I think I want to get to the point where no one's worried about me personally. Maybe they're interested in how I'm doing. How's Brenda? How's the life? Where are you? Where are you living? But not, how are you dealing with all of this? Because I think I want to show enough strength that we can get past this, right? Because I think when you look at it, you have to look at the positives. You have to look at all the things that you were successful at doing, and you can't get torn down by someone else's opinion of you, or someone else that wants to make accusations about you. And I always knew this was going to be a tough job, being a coach, but I never knew it was going to get to this point. And so this is a harsh reality for me where I challenge myself every day. Can you do it? Can you really do it? And if you can, I think there's going to be a lesson for everybody that we can all do this no matter how difficult it gets.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we're getting close to the end here. And I'll just say personally, I've been impressed with how tight and lockstep you have been. You gave me life skills 20, 25 years ago that continue to pay dividends in my daily life, uh, both in a big picture sense and, like I said, in a daily sense too. And I not only hope, but I am confident that we're getting close to the end and something really good is going to come of this. And not just for you, but like how you talk about your community and stuff like that. I really believe that we're going to have a reason to celebrate someday when we get on the other side of this. So,
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I maybe just close with this, right? It's like I always thought that I was going to have the greatest impact on your life and the players that I coached, and it's totally flipped. They've had the greatest impact on me and my life and who I am than I ever could have imagined. I always thought it was going to be the other way around. Like I'm giving the lessons, I'm teaching everything, and it's like when I look in that mirror, I look at, wow, how many lessons I have learned from the people that I have coached, and they have impacted my life. Unbelievable. It's unbelievable how much you guys have impacted my life.
all right.
Thanks.